here with everyone. Uh, I am totally passionate about the brain, something that I have enjoyed since my undergrad years in college. And so I hope that some of that passion comes through. It's going to be a lot of information, a lot of content. In fact, it might even feel like you're going to be drinking from a fire hose tonight. But I just want you to, I want to encourage you to kind of stick with it. I also just want to encourage you too that, you know, some of this information, if maybe you're going through some things that might kind of, you know, maybe just be discouraging or that might be concerning for you, I just want to encourage you because, you know, our brains are designed to heal. Just like if we were to break a bone in our body or get a cut and, you know, our body heals, the same thing is with our brains. God designed our brains to heal in this amazing way. And there are some wonderful things that we can do, simple things that don't cost any money that can help us heal our brains. And so we're going to discover some of that tonight. So first of all, the good news, people are actually living longer. So I was looking it up today and I found that the average age expectancy for 2020 is almost 79 years. So that's across genders and race. And we know that women will actually generally live a little longer than men. And so that's been this huge increase since 1950 when the average age expectancy was 68. And so here we are, better health, better nutrition, and we are living longer. But what about our brains? So here's what, you know, even though our bodies are healthier, sometimes I think, you know, we're not taking as, you know, as good a care of our brains. And so what kind of brains do we have today? And so what we're seeing is more depression, more anxiety, more stress, more mental illness, more vascular disease in the brain. And so even though we're taking care of our bodies, sometimes we're not thinking the same about our brain. And what I want you to know about the brain is, you know, your brain is an organ, just like other organs in your body. But yet your brain is the most important organ because it really controls everything else in your body. And so we are going to discover just how amazing, first of all, our brains are. And we're going to discover ways that we can improve our memories even as we age. And so first what we want to look at, and Helen, you can go to that slide on what normal memory loss is, but first of all, I want to look at what normal memory, oh, I forgot to show you about this. Okay, so this is a fun calculator to take to see how long you can live, living to 100. And so it takes about 15 minutes. And, you know, I think that'll be, you'll be able to find that when you see the PDF. And it'll ask you a bunch of questions, and then it'll calculate what your average, like, you know, life expectancy is. And so I've taken it and I have found out that I could potentially live to be 104. So I don't think I want to live to be 104, but you never know. But then they'll tell you some things that you can do if you want to live longer. Well, they told me if I wanted to stop drinking coffee, I could actually, increase my age by 2 years. And, you know, I just thought about it for a second. And then I thought, you know, I think I'm good with 104. You know, I don't think I can give up coffee. So anyways, you can try that. It's kind of fun to look at that. All right. So let's just kind of discover what normal memory loss is, because I think sometimes that is concerning. Like, what's normal? Like, I'm already just, you know, having some of these problems. So here's normal memory loss as we age: forgetting names, recalling specific details of events that we've had. We were just sitting around, I was talking with my kids the other night, and they're telling all these stories, and I'm going, I don't remember doing all of that. And I'm going, uh-oh, that's happening. Word finding problems. You know, when you're trying to go like, what is that word? That's normal memory loss as we age. Misplacing things. Forgetting why you entered a room. Now, I have to laugh because I do this all the time. And you know what I'm finding? It's not just about getting older that we forget that. I have 35-year-olds telling me that they're doing that. And I think today we have so much on our minds that that's another reason why we might forget that. So don't worry if that's happening to you. And then cognitive slowing, which just means that prefrontal cortex, which is our executive function of the brain, that's where we have the processing speed. That's where we bring in information, work it quickly, and respond. Well, that starts to slow down as we age. That's why older people drive a little bit slower and, you know, are not able to kind of work quickly in their minds the same. So those are normal signs of memory loss. So let's just let's have a look at the brain. I want to kind of explain some of the different areas in the brain and how memory works in the brain. I think when we're done here tonight, you're going to kind of be like mini experts on the brain. So it's going to be kind of exciting. And if you enjoy this topic, I know that it's going to be very, very interesting for you. So first of all, the temporal lobe, and this is kind of the memory and learning center of the brain. This is where we encode and store and retrieve long-term memories. All right, that's your temporal lobe. And in the temporal lobe, we have the hippocampus and the amygdala. So the hippocampus, we're going to talk a lot about the hippocampus, but the hippocampus is really the learning and memory center of the brain. Very important to protect this area of the brain. And this is where we encode explicit memory. Now, explicit memory are memories that use language. The one thing about the hippocampus that's also very important is this is where we transfer short-term memory, so things that we keep in that short-term memory, to long-term memory. So that is a very important part of being able to encode long-term memory, to keep that memory stored long-term into the brain. The amygdala is where we store emotional memories. This is kind of our threat center of the brain. This area of the brain is constantly, scanning our environment to make sure that we're safe. And if it senses any kind of threat, it goes into action. That's where we get that fight, flight, or freeze response if our brain detects something that might be dangerous for us. It works first. And that's why sometimes if maybe you're walking down a path and you see a stick in the path, and your brain might go, oh, it might be, because it immediately thinks it's a snake. And then once that has worked through and it goes to the cortex, where your brain is actually able to go, oh, wait a minute, that's not a snake, that is a stick. It calms down, but that protects you, and that encodes more emotional or implicit memories. And then the cerebellum, that is where we have procedural memory. So procedural memory are those things that we learn, like brushing our teeth, driving a car, driving a bicycle, putting on our shoes, all of those things, those are procedural kind of activities. Motor skills, and those are all unconscious, and those are very intact. Those stay with us right through to older age, so we don't lose those generally, unless there's some injury to that part of the brain. And then the frontal lobes, which is where we have that processing speed, and that's where we have short-term and working memory. So working memory is, where we're able to bring in information, manipulate it in our brain, and respond. Short-term, being able to hold a few numbers in your head, so that you can, dial that number, that kind of thing. And so those memories they don't encode into long-term, but that's that working memory. That's what kind of slows down with age. All right, so this is normal memory loss, and this is where those memory structures are in the brain. And so let's move on. I want to talk a little bit about what can contribute to memory loss. So this is, different than normal memory loss. So we all have normal memory loss, but then there's other things that can contribute to other types of memory loss. So first of all, strokes. Those are vascular episodes where you have a bleed in the brain that can damage brain tissue. So trauma, a head injury, very important to protect your brains from brain injuries or head injuries, because that can damage brain tissue. When we have, also if you've experienced a traumatic event, whether we've witnessed it, we've actually experienced some harm to us, or we even just thought we were in danger, that's a trauma. And when we experience any kind of trauma, whether it's from a head injury or being involved in a traumatic event, our brains release a stress hormone called cortisol. We're going to be talking a lot about that. But that cortisol is what stimulates that fight, flight, or freeze response. And when we have increased levels of cortisol in the brain, what happens is it kind of shuts down that hippocampus, and we're not able to encode those memories into our brain. And so we can't recall them. And that's why often I worked for a year in the hospital, and I worked with patients who'd had brain injuries and spinal cord injuries. And what we found is people who had been through some sort of brain trauma, they maybe would remember, that's where they have some amnesia. They would remember maybe the day before their accident, but then from the day of their accident all the way through until they woke up in the hospital, they had no memory. And that is one of the reasons why your brain is releasing these high levels of cortisol, which then keeps those memories from being encoded into your hippocampus. And the other thing is with trauma, even if you don't have a memory of the traumatic event, your body remembers. It's called body memories. And in fact, you can even have body memories from trauma that happened to you before you even had language. So even before 2 years old, you may not have any memory. You have no language to put towards that memory, but your body has a memory of something happening to you. So if something kind of triggers that reminds your body of that kind of trauma, your body can flood with cortisol as well. And that's why often people come for therapy, because they're having all of this anxiety, or they're getting triggered with all of these feelings and they don't understand where it comes from. They don't have any memory, but that could be from a time when they didn't have language yet to be able to explain what happened. So the reason that cortisol can be so damaging is a chronic release of cortisol can lead to depression, anxiety, brain damage, sleep disturbance, memory loss, and difficulties with learning. So another thing that can contribute to memory loss is stress. And we know that we're all under stress, so we're not going to be able to get away from stress. But when you recognize that you're under stress, like, it's always good for all of us to have some stress reducing activities to be able to help minimize that. Many medications can cause a foggy brain feeling, and this can impact your memory. So if you're on different medications and you're kind of feeling like your brain is foggy, you might want to check with your doctor about that. And then anxiety and depression. And this is always kind of fascinating for some people. They're always surprised when I start talking to them about, how's your memory? How's your focus? And they go, yeah, it's not very good. Well, guess what? They didn't realize that anxiety and depression can actually affect your memory. It can actually affect your ability to learn new things. And again, it's because of this flood of cortisol that is keeping that memory from being encoded into your hippocampus. So those are some things that can contribute to memory loss, but let's talk about what is not normal memory loss. Now, we're not going to go into all of these tonight, but they are in the PowerPoint, the information. But I just want to kind of touch on this and then kind of focus a little bit on Alzheimer's. So what is not normal memory loss? So we know that mild cognitive impairment is not normal memory loss. We know dementia is not normal memory loss, and then Alzheimer's. Now, the interesting thing about mild cognitive impairment and dementia, so mild cognitive impairment is, less kind of serious or impairing than dementia. So it's they kind of progress to Alzheimer's. And many of those that end up being diagnosed with dementia go on to have Alzheimer's. So let's kind of look at what is Alzheimer's, because I think that is a big issue, and a lot of people are concerned about that. You might have family members who have Alzheimer's. And, it's just kind of a very, very distressing illness. So we know that Alzheimer's represents about 60% of the dementia illnesses. And most cases of Alzheimer's happens after age 65. And it represents a very gradual decline. All right. So, and it's hard to say, that you can live, past 90 with Alzheimer's. So it can just be this gradual decline. And that decline represents where you need more and more care. You need more and more just care with daily activities. Now, those with an early onset, now before 65, it's a little bit more serious, and that can have a more rapid decline, which can lead to an earlier death from Alzheimer's. But it's important to know that Alzheimer's is not an aging condition. And unlike normal memory loss with age, Alzheimer's involves something different that happens in the brain. It involves an increase when we call plaques in the brain, which is similar to cholesterol that increases plaques in the blood vessels in the brain, and neurofibrillary tangles. So Alzheimer's, when they've done autopsies on the brain of people with Alzheimer's, they would find a lot of these plaques and these kind of like these lesions and these tangles throughout their brain. And so it was different than normal memory loss. And although we still have a lot to learn about Alzheimer's and how it progresses, we do know that when they have done these autopsies, they have been able to detect these abnormalities in 2 areas of the brain, in the hippocampus, which is the memory and learning center, and the temporal parietal area. So that area of the brain is where you have sensory, language, perception, and motor activity and those kind of things. And so what happens with these tangles and plaques is it begins to destroy those nerve cells. So here is a great picture of, this is when they kind of put some dye into people's, or I don't know what they do. They do something, some sort of SPECT scan, and they're able to detect how the brain is firing. So all those different colors show all the neurotransmitters firing in your brain. So that normal brain there, you see everything's lit up. There's all kinds of activity going on in the brain. That's a healthy brain. In mild cognitive impairment, you see a little less activity going on there, and you see that little black area. Those are areas, that is an area of the brain where there is no cell activity happening. There's no firing. Those are basically brain cells that are no longer working. And then you can see with Alzheimer's, there is a great deal of damage there that causes a great deal of impairment. All right, so that's all the bad news. And now for the good news. We need some good news, right? We need some good news. So what's the good news? Well, the good news is what I'm really excited about, because this is something that has actually been discovered fairly new in the scientific environment. 15 to 20 years, maybe even a little bit less than that, is neurogenesis. Neurogenesis, in fact, they didn't actually think that we could reproduce brain cells. At one point, they thought that the brain cells that we got when we were born are all that we got. But they have discovered that particularly in two areas of the brain, we are actually generating brand new brain cells every day. And it happens in the hippocampus. I told you we're going to talk a lot about the hippocampus, and the olfactory bulb. Now, that olfactory bulb is our sense of smell. So interestingly, we're actually regenerating brand new cells in our smell sense of the brain, but also in the hippocampus. And remember, the hippocampus is where our memory is and our learning center. So where we are able to learn new things and memory. So here's an interesting fact. So when we're born, we have about 200 billion brain cells. And in other areas of the brain, we don't get any more new brain cells. In fact, in the other areas of the brain, those brain cells get pruned away until when we become an adult, we have about 100 billion brain cells. So from that 200 billion to 100 billion throughout life at specific times, like early childhood, adolescence, and then early adulthood, around, in the early to mid 20s, which we know now the brain doesn't fully develop into the prefrontal cortex until 25, and that is that rational thinking part of the brain. During those different times of your life, those cells are actually being pruned away. So basically what we don't use in the brain, those cells that we don't use, those pathways, those synapses we don't use, they get pruned away. And so those areas of the brain, they don't regenerate new cells. But yet in the hippocampus and olfactory, that our brain is creating new cells every day. So that's very exciting. And that is basically new information that we have learned, that we can actually have an impact on how our brain reproduces new cells every day in our memory and learning center of the brain. So let me go on to the next slide. We want to kind of just talk about what's happening in that hippocampus. So we lose cells every day in the hippocampus, but with neurogenesis, we're replacing all of those cells plus more every day. So we're getting more back until age 40. After age 40, there's a 5% cell loss per decade, which means we're losing 5% more cells every decade than we're able to replace. All right. By age 80, there's actually a 33% cell loss. So what happens is, as there's cell loss, that hippocampus begins to atrophy, which means it gets a little bit smaller. Well, we've discovered, though, that we can do some things that not only increase that cell growth, which then also increases that size of your hippocampus, so that you can slow down not only the memory loss, but the atrophy of that area of the brain. So how does neurogenesis happen? Okay, so on the next slide, this is how neurogenesis happens. It's through this amazing little protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is a protein in the brain that helps grow, protect, and repair nerve cells. And so why is this so important? Throughout our brain, BDNF is working every day to repair brain cells in other areas of the brain, to reduce the toxic effect of cortisol, which is very important because we're going to talk more about cortisol. It is the catalyst for neurogenesis, which is new cells being birthed every day in our hippocampus and our olfactory bulb, and for cell growth. And it's the key to neuroplasticity. So we're going to talk a little bit more about neuroplasticity. This is another exciting brand new information that we've learned about the brain. Because they used to think that your brain wasn't moldable. You couldn't change anything in your brain. But now we know that the brain is actually plastic or moldable, and you can actually change different pathways in the brain. You can actually, through your own actions, your own thought processes, be able to develop brand new pathways in the brain to be able to develop new habits, new thinking. And we're actually going to show a little video about that in just a little bit. But neuroplasticity is very exciting because it does matter what we do today. It does matter how we think, because what we're doing is we're actually changing our brain. So the exciting thing about this, in the hippocampus, BDNF, literally, studies have shown once it's released into the brain cells, within 24 hours, there is brand new cells and increased brain size. So what does this mean for us? How does this impact us? And how do we get more BDNF? I bet you that's what you're all asking, right? Because we all need more BDNF. And so the answer to that big question, how can we slow down memory loss as we age and even recover memory loss? In these 4 ways that I want you to remember. And we're going to break each one of these apart, so you're going to learn about them. But number 1 way is to increase BDNF in your brain. We're going to learn how to do that. Number 2, reduce vascular episodes. Reduce your risk of having a stroke. We'll talk about how to do that. Increase your neuron connections, which is neuroplasticity. We're going to learn how to do that. And finally, protect the hippocampus. All right. So how can we increase BDNF? All right, so first of all, the number 1 way, and I don't know, maybe some of you may not be excited to hear about this, but the number 1 way to increase BDNF is through exercise. Okay, I'm going to say it again. That's why I wrote it in big letters. Exercise. Can you believe it? So simple. We can increase BDNF every day by exercise, and particularly weight training and interval training. These 2 particular types of exercise actually stimulates BDNF, which then increases the release of BDNF and creates more brain cells in your hippocampus. So when you're sweating it out, your brain is getting healthy and it's getting stronger. Imagine while your muscles are getting big, your hippocampus is getting big too. And that is a really good thing. So interesting, I kind of put up an article there on interval training because weight training increases myokines, which are a peptide that literally stimulate BDNF, and interval training increases mitochondria, which is actually real energy for the muscles. And there was a really great article on just the impact of interval training, especially as you age, and how even people that are older benefit more from interval training than younger people. So yay for the older people for interval training. Somebody was asking me too, like, do those mind exercises really work, like luminosity or those kind of things? Absolutely. Mind exercises, learning new things, playing mind games, Scrabble, Sudoku, doing puzzles. My 91, almost 92-year-old mother, actually, I can't believe my mother's that old, but yeah, she is. She has the sharpest mind, and she plays puzzles and solitaire and all these games on the computer and everything. and she used to walk for an hour every day. And that woman, she's got a sharper brain than I do some days. So it really is impactful to do those mind games. Very, very helpful. And then doing some memory games, just like testing yourself with some sort of memory game. You can use some cards. But here's a great one that might be fun to try. It's called Remember Later game. I want you to think of something that you want to remember, like a number, an object, a name, for the next day, and then set your timer for the next day. And then when the timer goes off, try to remember what you wanted to remember. And if you kind of practice that can kind of get your brain kind of encoding that into your mind. Another great game is just a word association game with two players. Pick a category like food, and one person says, let's say apple, and the next person has to think of a word that starts with the last letter of the previous word. So that's working memory too. So very good kind of different activities. Reduce cortisol damage from anxiety and depression. So I think this is an area where I think when people don't realize, when you're experiencing anxiety and depression, you are releasing cortisol. And when we are releasing high amounts of cortisol, that damages our ability to release BDNF. And so, I work with a lot of people who are kind of hesitant about going on antidepressants. And I just want to encourage you, like sometimes the benefits of going on an antidepressant outweigh the negative. And the benefits are how it can kind of restore your brain to better balance, reduce that cortisol damage, and be able to release more BDNF. And so for most people, they don't have to be on antidepressants for very long, but sometimes it's just helping that person, get out of a crisis and be able to get back on the road to health. And so, I just try to help my patients feel a little bit, more relieved about having to go on antidepressants, and they're not addictive. You're not going to develop some sort of tolerance to them. You will be able to, develop those skills to help you. But in the interim, that time being able to release that, reduce that cortisol is going to be very, very important for your brain, because, that ongoing cortisol, it's really affecting your memory daily. And so that the chronic release of that is going to be damaging. And then having some, reducing stress. So I know we can't necessarily get rid of stress in our life, but we can do some stress reducing activities like, purposeful breathing through the diaphragm, doing some meditation or mindfulness exercises, just regular exercise, listening to music, doing some, self-care, and actually putting that into your lifestyle and just being aware of it can be very helpful in reducing that cortisol release and helping with that BDNF. Okay, so that is how we can increase BDNF in our brains. The second area that we talked about was reducing vascular episodes. So how do we do that? First of all, number one, healthy diet. And I know this is the first time I'm kind of mentioning diet, but it's kind of implied that diet is essential for brain health, along with vitamin-rich foods and good proteins, of course, and also healthy fats. There are some, supplements, especially if you're not able to get like as a varied diet as you would like. And sometimes just, maybe we're not able to, absorb some of those nutrients. I know I have celiac disease, so sometimes I'm not able to absorb all the nutrients that I'm taking in. So supplements can be very helpful. I know, doing some research on this and even talking to my doctor, vitamin D3, there's been just we've become more aware that people are more deficient in vitamin D. And so we know that vitamin D, a deficiency in that can really affect our cognition and our memory. Getting some vitamin C every day and vitamin B complex and omega-3 fatty acids. So if you want to add some supplements to kind of help with that memory, to kind of help with that brain health, those are some good ones to add in there. So that was vitamin D3, vitamin C, vitamin B complex, and omega-3 fatty acids. Those have all been shown to improve brain health and cognition. Don't smoke. Enough said. keep your blood pressure and cholesterol levels down. And if you have to take medications for that, sometimes that's just genetic. You can do everything that you can, with your diet and exercise. We also know that exercise is very helpful with bringing that cholesterol, that bad cholesterol level down and increasing the good cholesterol. But sometimes just genetically, we have inherited that. And so don't hesitate to take those medications. We definitely do not want to create any kind of hypertension where your blood pressure is going up, because that isn't going to increase your risk of a vascular episode. I just want to throw in here too, energy drinks. When I worked in the hospital, we had a high incidence of people coming in, young people, who were drinking a lot of energy drinks and having vascular episodes. Like, these are 30, 35-year-olds having strokes. And they were combining a lot of things, obviously, energy drinks and maybe some alcohol, smoking marijuana. So obviously not a good combination. But, even now, there's been some warnings on energy drinks. Such a high amount of caffeine thrown into your system really increases your heart rate immediately, which then sends a lot of blood to your brain. And if you have any kind of weakness there, it can really make you vulnerable to have a vascular episode. So just everything in moderation, right? So just, being careful with those. I really am very careful talking with my patients, finding out, what they're, especially with the high levels of caffeine, putting into your system. And then regular exercise is the number one way to protect against vascular episodes. So you're seeing a theme here a little bit, and I'm preaching to myself too, they always say when it comes to exercise, you need the why, right? Because when you're sweating it out and you just really want to give up, it's like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And I think for me, this is one of my whys. Like, if my body's going to stay healthy till I'm 79, I want my brain to be just as healthy. I want to be remembering things and being able to interact with my grandchildren when I'm 79, 80, like I am now. And so this is my why. And I really hope and pray that as you kind of take this in today, and you might have another why, but if you can just really understand this amazing gift of our brain, and that even just through something as simple as having regular exercise, we can actually do something amazing to help our brains and take care of this amazing gift that God has given us. All right, so that is in reducing vascular episodes. So the next one was increasing neuron connections. So I'm going to show you this cool little slide here. So these are little brain cells. These are your cell bodies. And so in between the brain cell, at the end of, in the brain cell, you see all of those, outside of the nucleus, those little orange, kind of arms. Those are called axons. And at the end of the axon are these little dendrites, they call them. And these dendrites, they connect to dendrites from other cells. And when they fire, you get this electrical charge that comes through the cell, through the axon, through the dendrites, into the other dendrites of the other cell. Now, those synapses there's a tiny little bit of an opening in those synapses, and that's where all of those chemicals get fired, and those neurotransmitters, and they get fired through the dendrites, and they get taken up by the other dendrites on the other cell. So the cool thing about this is we have about 100 billion neurons that are firing all the time in our brains. Like, it's unbelievable. It's amazing. And these neurons are firing approximately 200 times a second. And each neuron connects to about 1,000 other neurons. So just imagine this is going on in your brain all the time. And so when you're thinking about that, like, we want to have these healthy neuron connections happening, because the faster your brain is firing, the healthier your brain is, and the faster it works. And so how can we increase these neuron connections, and how can we keep them healthy? Well, one of the ways is through BDNF. So BDNF also increases those little dendrites. So as you are releasing more BDNF, that axon actually grows more dendrites, which means it can reach more cells. So that increases that activity. So you can always be getting more dendrites. that's not the same as getting new cells. But dendrites are always growing, and they're being repaired throughout our whole brain. So one of the ways to increase neuron connections is staying cognitively active. So that's just like those mind exercises, learning new things, practicing memory tasks, brain games, also social activity. So lots of connection with other people. That helps keep those neuron connections firing and staying healthy. Neuroplasticity. So this is the concept of use it or lose it. So when we are using different skills and tasks, and we're doing things that help our brain to learn, and we keep doing those over and over again, we keep those synapses, we keep those neurons, we keep those dendrites firing. But if we're not using them, then we lose them. The dendrites actually then they break off and they die off. So if we're not going to use those areas, we actually have less dendrites. So you want to have more dendrites, because the more dendrites, the more firing that you have going on, which means a healthier brain. Mindfulness activity. So, this could be just something as simple as focusing on going outside and just focusing on hearing the birds, right? So it's just really, mindfulness just means you are filtering everything out, all the stimuli that's coming at us all day long, and you tell your brain, I'm just going to focus on this one thing. Now, why is that healthy? It's healthy because we're training our brain that we can focus on one thing. Because often that anxious brain, or that, multitasking brain, is focusing on so many things. And I mean, that's, how our brain is working. But when we want to have some time to give our brain a rest, we want to take those thoughts and focus it on that one thing. That helps give our brain a rest. It's training our brain to focus. You're training a brand new pathway in your brain. And it could be meditation, meditating on a verse or a prayer, anything like that, where we're taking time and having focused attention on something, allows our brain to kind of heal and allows our brain to focus and kind of gives our brain a little bit of a rest. So they've done this study on this, and they have discovered that these kind of activities, putting them, I get my patients to do like kind of regular breathing exercises, and that takes focus. You have to focus on your breathing. And even just doing that 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day is so helpful for your brain, because actually studies have shown that people that do this actually increase BDNF and dendrite activity in their brain. But also we've noticed that it improves mood doing this as a regular activity. And people who are, making meditation or mindfulness a regular practice of their lives can actually decrease depression and anxiety. And then another way to increase neuron activity is to change how you think. So how we think is important to everything, because how we think influences our emotions, which then influences our behavior. So I work with so many people who've had a lot of difficult things happen, and who have a lot of negative thoughts and negative core beliefs. And what happens is, when we have these negative core beliefs, our brain is kind of searching out things that affirm that negative belief, or maybe how they see something that happens, and then they immediately interpret that as negative. And so what you want to do is, when I help my patients do, is reprocess those negative events so that they can start to see it from a positive perspective. And we know that having a more positive perspective does wonders for the brain, not only improving mood, but it actually helps with neuron activity and creating more connections in the brain. And as we change our thoughts to more positive thoughts, our emotions are more positive, and then our behaviors become more positive. It becomes this amazing cycle of health and life. And then another way is through developing new habits. And I'm going to show you a little video of how we can do this. But actually, by developing new habits and developing new thought patterns, we are actually changing our brain. And our new habits become the pathway that our brain wants to use. So no, it doesn't matter. This is the awesome thing. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can begin to have new habits, new thought patterns, and regardless of how old you are. And it just comes from doing it over and over again. Because remember, your brain is a muscle as well as an organ. So just like if you're training a muscle in your arms, then, you need to keep doing that over and over. And as you do it over and over, your muscle gets stronger. The same thing happens with your brain. The more you're using that same pathway, yes, you can teach an old dog new tricks. Thanks, Patty. And, the more you do that, you are able to change those thought patterns. And then again, exercise regularly. All right, so I want to, Helen's going to show us this little video on neuroplasticity. This is really cool.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
So, we can change our brains. That is very exciting, isn't it? Just by making those simple choices, we can take this amazing brain that God has created, given us, and designed to function efficiently to be able to, change our brain chemistry, change our brain activity, change our brain size, and even change our brain health. And, that's why I'm really excited about First Place for Health, because when I think about the four kind of pillars that First Place for Health, talks about spiritual health, emotional health, physical health, and mental health, basically, they are the four pillars. Those are the things that really help us have better mental health and longevity. In fact, when it comes to spiritual health, studies show that when we have a sense of hope and a sense of purpose, that also helps us with our brain. It helps us want to live longer. It helps us give us purpose for living longer. In fact, I did my doctoral dissertation on this and, found that people that had, kind of a personal relationship with God, not only did they have a greater sense of well-being, but even if they had negative events going on in their life or negative things going on, it didn't really dampen their general sense of well-being. So they were still able to have a sense of joy and purpose in their life, even when they were going through negative things. And so it really does make a difference, that perspective. Emotional health, family relationships, church, friends, and having that positive perspective, again, is part of that mental health. Physical health, eating and exercise, and then mental health, watching what we're thinking, changing those negative thoughts to something positive, which then leads to positive emotions and positive actions. And so I know we kind of, we had a lot of information. There's so much more that I'd love to share with you. Maybe another time we can do a follow-up one, but this is just kind of a little bit of a taste of just how exciting our brains are and what we can do to kind of, increase our ability to have better memory, have better learning ability, and to keep that growing and functioning long into our lives. And so thank you so much for having me, Helen. If we have any questions you wanted to
Yes, we do have some questions. And so if you guys could, some of you are putting it in the chat, if you could put it in the Q&A, we have 9 in there. So, but my first question was, what all does the left parietal lobe part of the brain control, and can it grow back if it shrinks?
Whoa, that's a big question. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a good question. I don't have all the answers to that. I know that, we know that, the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. So if it's on the left side of the brain, sounds like this is somebody who's maybe had some damage in that area. If there's been damage to the cells in other parts of the brain, we know that those don't recover. So if you have damaged cells in some parts of the brain that don't have neurogenesis, you're not going to get new brain cells, all right? But we do know that the brain has this amazing way to compensate. So cells from other parts of the brain can kind of move over and kind of, you get that dendrite activity. We know a fraction of how much the brain really works, but we do know that the brain has this amazing ability to compensate. So if one area of the brain is kind of damaged, another area may kind of help compensate for that. But in the parietal lobe, that's, some of the fine motor activity. And so some of that can be affected. But we do know that when that physical therapy working on some of the things, you can gain some of that back.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next question is you went over it with vitamins, but what certain foods, is there any certain kind of food to help improve our memory?
I was going to, thanks for reminding me, because I wanted to give you guys a good book to read if you're interested in more of this, by Dr. Daniel Amen, A-M-E-N. He is a psychiatrist. I think he's a psychologist too, but he has a book called Memory Rescue, and it's so encouraging. It talks about how you can restore some memory loss, even with Alzheimer's. In fact, I had written down a couple of studies that found that even with early onset Alzheimer's, that exercise has been shown to improve memory and even reduce atrophy of the hippocampus. So but he goes into more detail about different foods you can, eat to help with it. I wrote down some like serotonin-rich foods like eggs, turkey, lentils, nuts, high-protein veggies such as broccoli and spinach, sweet potatoes. Dark chocolate releases serotonin in the brain, but just that really good dark chocolate, and bananas and broccoli. So those are just a few. I just kind of wrote down a few things, but yeah, I would highly recommend that book.
Great, thank you. And that was Memory Rescue by Daniel Amen.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question is, my dad had dementia and then Alzheimer's in his 80s. He died at 87. Am I more likely to get these, dementia and Alzheimer's?
So we do know it can run in families. It can be hereditary, but it doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to get it. It may mean that you genetically may be more predisposed to it, but as we know, you can be doing some things to kind of reduce that. The one thing, and I didn't have time to share this, maybe I'll share it now. So there was this nun study that they did on 678 nuns, and it's very fascinating. They did this longitudinal study in 1989, and they got all the nuns to permission to autopsy their brains when they died. And so they looked at all their different factors of their lifestyle. And these nuns had healthy diets. They had cognitively enriched environments. So they were learning, reading, lots of that. None of them smoked. Great community support. They were, of course, had spirituality in their lives. Physical activity. I mean, they worked hard. They were very much more positively, kind of had positive emotions and thoughts. And they worked throughout their lives. The one sister who lived to be, I think, 102, when she was asked, when are you going to retire? She said, I only retire when I go to bed. And they were mentally active. They were reading, learning new things, etc. So what they did was when they died, after they died, they autopsied their brains. And this is what they found. So the results with these women is that they all lived longer than people outside of that were the same age of them, but outside of their group. So their counterparts, they lived longer. They had lower incidence of dementia, but the most interesting finding, and here's what's important, although many of the nuns had increased plaques and tangles in their brains, that is, kind of evidence of Alzheimer's, none of them suffered dementia. They did not suffer dementia or Alzheimer's. But the contributing factor was that they had no coexisting vascular disease. So there was no strokes or evidence of, ischemic activity in their brain. So although they showed pathology for Alzheimer's without the vascular disease, it did not result in dementia or Alzheimer's. So that is very encouraging news. So even if you're predisposed to getting some of those plaques or tangles, without the vascular disease, you can, kind of avoid getting that dementia. And so just to encourage you that it's not a sentence if you have someone in the family, but it's definitely something to kind of keep an eye on.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, would focusing on one thing be like grounding? How often would we want to do this?
Okay, yeah, so grounding is a good way. We often use grounding with people who have trauma, who maybe are experiencing some PTSD or a panic attack. So grounding is like where you might do like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, like what are 5 things I see in the room? What are 4 things I hear? What is something I smell? Those kind of things. So you're kind of using your senses and you're just focusing on what you can see, hear, feel, smell, taste, that kind of stuff. And that can be that can be a form of mindfulness. There's really nothing, you can't do it wrong. Let me just say that. It's just, kind of focus. You could even just be focusing on your breathing as it comes in through your nose, because it's usually cool air. And then when you breathe out, it's warm air. And you could just do that for a minute. There's a lot of great apps that can help you with mindfulness. One is Calm, CALM. Another one is Breathe to Relax. There's a great Christian one called Abide, which kind of offers some breathing and mindfulness things. So, and then, sometimes you can just find them on the internet where they just kind of talk you through some mindfulness, where you're actually, following through and kind of focusing your mind on what they're saying. So, but yeah, that is a great question.
All right. Can you reverse the effects of Alzheimer's?
Well, I'm not a doctor a medical doctor. So that's a hard question for me to answer. I don't know if you can reverse it, but from my understanding, you can slow down the progression. So I know with people with Alzheimer's, they do give them some medication to help kind of slow down that progression. And as I was kind of saying earlier, a recent study, I think it was just pretty recent, maybe 2019, where they found that, exercise can kind of slow down that memory loss with Alzheimer's.
Okay, thank you. Can someone start losing memory at an early age?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, for all the reasons we talked about, right? So
Right.
like,
the stress,
depression, anxiety. I mean, we have such an increase in that happening in our culture. In fact, anxiety is the #1 mental health issue. And I think people try to fight it, themselves. And, without some of those, ways to learn how to manage and cope with it, we're having that constant cortisol release. And and I think I want to really emphasize how damaging that chronic cortisol release can be. And so if you're, noticing that edginess, racing thoughts, kind of those symptoms of anxiety, I kind of wrote like, don't ignore that. Like I have so many people that wait so long before they get help, see a professional, get on something to help them. And, again, lack of sleep or poor sleep is really, really difficult. So yes, all of these things can begin to affect our memory at any age, honestly. I mean, I have teenagers in my office that are struggling with anxiety and having difficulty with their memory. But the good news is it, when you're, it's that's reversible. that's reversible. You know, like that kind of memory loss due to those kind of conditions that we talked about when you are, you know, taking the time to get well. Like a serious brain or head injury, though, I mean, that can affect memory loss at a young age. And sometimes we, you know, we kind of minimize those kind of things. We don't take those seriously. So I see so many people out on bicycles without a helmet. Oh my gosh,
Right.
it makes me nervous, you know, because they don't realize this is so important for everything. And you know, just protect your brain as much as you can.
Right. Well, we have more questions, but we don't have more time, everyone. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for Dr. Barbara for joining us. For those of you that are maybe new to First Place for Health and you haven't heard of us before, I just wanted to point you to our website, which is firstplaceforhealth.com. And it is but you can go, we have a shortcut, fp4h.com. And that you can find up on the top of the page. I'm actually going to go to the next page. Up in the top right hand corner, you will see that you can go to our Facebook page and you could like us on our Facebook page up here. We also have a YouTube channel. All of our past webinars, this was one of the questions. We've been doing a monthly webinar since 2016. All of them, a recording of them, are on our YouTube channel. I also just wanted to point, if you are already familiar with First Place and you'd like to support us, you could join one of our membership levels. If you're brand new, level 1 is free. So you just go on, I put our website up there, just go to membership, create an account and go for level 1. And level 1 gets you a free ebook about healthy eating, our monthly newsletter, and in our emails, we remind everybody about our webinars every single month. We're usually here on the second Monday of every month. Again, I want to thank Dr. Barbara Wilson, who, by the way, didn't mention it, but she's in a First Place for Health group too. So that's how she knows about First Place. Barbara, any last words? You want to tell them about your website or how to get in touch with you or anything?
Yeah, sure. So I have a couple websites. My professional one is drbwilson.com. And then my writing and author and speaking one is barbarawilson.org. And yeah, you can reach me through both of those places. So,
all right, everybody. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.